Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Basis Points, where we dive deep into the numbers and the stories that drive our economy and shape our world. The headlines. The government's infrastructure spending increases in September, driven by higher disbursements for road projects. After falling to the 6,700 level last Friday, what's in store for the local stock market this week, particularly with rising political tensions? We'll get all the insights from Jonasrellas, a senior advisor at Reyes Tacandong and Company, later on in the show. Developing nations reject the $300 billion climate finance deal reached by wealthier countries at the COP29 summit. And Wicked becomes the biggest Broadway musical to hit the big screen. First, let's take a look at how the financial markets performed last week. Wall Street ended the week with gains as all three major indices finished higher on Friday. Investors drew comfort from data showing strong economic activity. Business activity in the U.S. soared to a 31-month high in November, driven by hopes for lower interest rates and more business-friendly policies under the incoming Trump administration.
It's not the Mag 7s that are really leading the markets. It's utilities, it is consumer staples. It's the other sectors that have been neglected for a long time. And also, small caps are also rallying. And so that kind of broadening is something that investors have been waiting for a long time. So it is very nice to see.
In Europe, markets also ended the week in positive territory following disappointing economic indicators. Now, this strengthened expectations that central banks will cut rates in. Now, over in London, for example, market participants now fully expect a 75 basis point rate cut from the Bank of England before the year's end. Here in the Asia-Pacific region, stocks are also moving higher ahead of a busy week. Japan's Nikkei 225 and South Korea's Kospi have both gained 1%, while Australia's S&P ASX 200 reached a new all-time high of 84.59 in today's trading session. In the commodities market, Brent crude prices are up nearly 2%, trading at $75 a barrel. Gold also rose by 1%, now trading above $900 per troy. $9,000 rather per troy ounce. Now let's take a look at the week ahead for global markets. The group of 7 foreign ministers will meet in Italy, running through the 27th. This meeting comes as Russia's invasion of Ukraine entered its 1,000th day last week, and it continues to escalate. Safe haven bonds have seen a rally, reflecting investor concern. However, markets will likely struggle to interpret the full impact of any new G7 statement until the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's position on Ukraine becomes clearer. Here in the Philippines, we'll get data on the government's October budget balance this Wednesday. In September, the budget deficit widened to 273 billion pesos, up from 250 billion pesos in the same month last year. However, revenues jumped 17% year on year, mainly driven by strong non-tax collections. In the United States, all eyes will be on Wednesday's release of the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, which is the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation. This data will be a key indicator ahead of the Fed's December 17 to 18 policy meeting. Also in the U.S., the Thanksgiving week concludes with Black Friday, which traditionally kicks off the holiday shopping season. Investors will be watching closely to see how inflation impacts consumer spending habits this year. After 2 weeks of marathon negotiations, a new climate finance deal is reached at the COP29 summit in Baku, Azerbaijan. However, it leaves many developing nations frustrated. Wealthier nations commit to contributing $300 billion a year to help poorer nations address the impacts of climate change. This is a significant increase from their previous pledge to provide $100 billion annually by 2020. However, it falls short of the $1.3 trillion that many had intended. Many recipients had hoped for.
People doubted that Azerbaijan could deliver. They doubted that everyone could agree. They were wrong on both. We never accepted that the task was impossible. We knew that breakthroughs demand courage. We understood that reaching for the highest possible ambition is difficult. And we asked everyone to be brave.
No country got everything they wanted and we leave Baku with a mountain of work to do. The many other issues we need to progress may not be headlines, but they are lifelines for billions of people. So this is no time for victory laps. We need to set our sights and redouble our efforts on the road to Beleng. Even so, we've shown the UN Paris Agreement is delivering, but governments still need to pick up the pace.
But for some countries, this simply wasn't enough.
I regret to say that this document is nothing more than an optical illusion. This, in our opinion, will not address the enormity of the challenge we all face.
That the developing country is saying that it's taking the lead with $300 billion till 2035 is a joke. And it's not something we should take lightly. I do not think it's something we should clap our hands and force us to take it.
La delegación cubana lamenta profundamente.
The scope of the decision adopted demonstrates the lack of agreement between our developed country partners in the face of the global panorama of climate change and reflects a clear intention to renounce their responsibilities, which have been historically and legally shouldered and recognized in the framework.
Even UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez expressed his disappointment, saying that he had hoped for a more ambitious outcome. However, he stressed that the agreement provides a foundation to build on and must be honored in full. Now let's turn to Donald Trump's incoming cabinet. The president-elect picks billionaire investor Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary, a position with significant influence over economic and regulatory affairs. Wall Street has been closely watching Trump's selection for this coveted role, particularly given his plans to revamp global trade through tariffs. Bessent has been a strong advocate for tax reform and deregulation to promote bank lending and increase energy production. For Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Trump reappoints Russ Vought, who also led the agency during his previous term. Vought is a key architect behind the controversial Project 2025, which proposes policies that would significantly expand presidential power. Trump has denied any connection to Project 2025, though many of its authors were his former officials. And for Agriculture Secretary, Trump picks Brooke Rollins, president of the right-leaning think tank America First Policy Institute. Rollins also chaired the Domestic Policy Council during Trump's first term. Now, here at home, the government increases its infrastructure spending in September, driven by higher disbursements for road projects. State infrastructure expenditure and other capital outlays jumped almost 17%, reaching 137.1 billion pesos. For the nine-month period, total spending reached 982 billion pesos, a 15% increase compared to the same period last year. Now, the Ninoy Aquino International Airport sees a rise in travelers this year. Data from the Manila International Airport Authority shows that passenger volume increased by 10.7% in the first 9 months of the year, reaching 37.38 million. Over 20 million were domestic travelers, while the rest were international passengers. Travel is expected to continue to surge this holiday season. NAIA's operator, New NAIA Infra Corporation, or NNIC, expects to reach 50 million air passengers this year. Now we're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line.
Isang oras ng makabuluhan at magulong talakayan. Pabayaan na lang natin silang lumubog, no?
Speaking of logic, Sec, ano yung
ay baguhin yung narrative.
Bawat issue nga, May iba't ibang anggulo.
May iba't ibang kwento.
Iba't ibang perspektibo.
Mahal na tayong tatlo siguro.
Hindi rin.
Speaking of trolls, salamat sa ating mga viewers ngayon.
Ito talaga mga kongresista na ito.
Dito lamang sa Cuatro Cardos.
From Manila to the globe, this is World Newsfeed, bringing you the biggest stories shaping our time. Let's dive into the headlines making a global impact.
Welcome back to Basis Points. Trading at the Philippine Stock Exchange opened just a few minutes ago. Let's take a look at the initial figures. Now, after dropping 1.21% last week to 67.80 last Friday, we're seeing some gains in the market, a little bit of a rebound. The market is up by 0.8% back at the 6,800 level to 68.33. The broader all shares index is up as well, up by 0.5% to 38.08. As for the sub indices, all are trading in positive territory except for the industrial counter, which is flat right now. Meanwhile, at the foreign exchange market, the peso opened unchanged against the greenback at 58.85 compared to its previous close of 58.87. Now, to help us make sense of these numbers, we're joined by Jonasrellas, a senior advisor at Reyes Tacandong and Company. Jonas, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Maiki. Good morning to your listeners.
Good morning, Jonas. Good to have you with us. A lot of things going on. The market rebounded from sell-offs following Trump's election victory last week. And then again, we were sharply in the red. Talking about last week, was this a dead cat bounce, a classic dead cat bounce, Jonas?
Yeah, I think it was more really of a dead cat bounce or a technical rebound, mainly because we were on a losing streak, and people would always try to bargain hunt, especially those institutional buyers. So I think that's what we saw last week, hoping that I think what fueled the bounce was really more of expectation that probably the BSP will cut by 25 at best, 50 basis points come December, to augment the slowing growth in the third quarter.
Okay, so you're of the belief that the BSP is going to continue cutting rates in December rather than taking a pause.
Yeah, I think it's almost end of the year anyway. So even though the peso weakens further, it will reset by end of the year. So it will actually give us more leeway for investors to look at the Philippines if we're slightly on a more competitive end.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the broader concerns for the Philippine market, there's the peso at a 2-year low against the greenback. How concerned are you about the weakness in the local currency?
I'm not as worried. One is that we have very strong gross international reserves of over $100 billion. So that's one. Second, I think we're managing the currency volatility well. I think what we just need to be able to do is to really ensure, manage the volatility in the sense that, it's a two-way street. It's not just going in one direction. And what we've seen so far since November 5, we've seen the peso just really slowly moving up the range. Mm-hmm. So that's quite well. I think what we need to be able to do is really understand that the impact of the Trump 2.0 will really mean a weaker peso.
Okay. Now, in terms of managing the risks to the peso, I guess what you mean by that is taking a look at who's going to benefit from this, because there are pros and cons to any situation. With weakness in the peso, we can look at OFW remittances, we can look at tourism and BPOs, and possibly FDIs in the manufacturing space. So, Jonas, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, well, basically, definitely a weaker peso will create a lot of attractiveness, particularly tourism. And this is one of the pillars that we've been trying to develop to ensure that this will be another pillar where we'll get dollars. So I think with this trend right now, tourism could actually take center stage, followed by the BPO sector. And thanks to all of the infrastructure that we're trying to do, better airports, better roads, we can eventually try to bring in manufacturing. So hopefully those pledges from foreign countries and investors to look at the Philippines as an alternative supply chain site, then this could be a good opportunity with the weaker peso.
Okay. Now, on another front, Jonas, we made international headlines over the weekend after our Vice President, Sara Duterte, said that if she were to be killed, she would have President Marcos assassinated. So the Marcos-Duterte rift was laid bare for the world to see, cause and effect. How do you see this political noise affecting investor sentiment in the Philippines?
Well, basically, in the past years, we've already seen the politics fatigue from investors, and from time to time, we tend to ignore this. However, they don't forget it, but it's at the back of their minds. But if this continues, and this could create further deterioration in the peso and the equity market sentiment. So this is something that, again, could, if this noise continues, rather than, I think at the moment it's more of knee-jerk reaction by the market, but other factors would probably be more significant. But just the same, if this continues to be in our headlines, then this will further deteriorate the sentiment and, could exacerbate any foreign outflows out of the market.
What are the top factors weighing on investor sentiment right now, Jonas, in terms, in order of the weight?
Well, basically, I think one of the key issues really for investors is the impact of inflation. They worry that if the peso weakens, then definitely inflation could come back. As I said, in the past, the BSP have highlighted the impact of transmission of around 0.03% on inflation per 1 peso depreciation. So it's very little. However, of course, it really impacts on prices. And this is something that is more of the risk that we have. The second one is the geopolitics, because this creates supply chain disruptions. So I think probably maybe the third or fourth would probably put in the political noise that's rising here in the Philippines. And the third, I think, is the question of slowing growth.
Okay, Jonas, last question, year-end predictions. The PSEi is at 68.33 right now, and the peso is at around 58 to the greenback. What are your year-end targets for the peso in this scenario?
Well, okay. Originally, I was looking at the 7,100 index by year-end, and eventually the peso probably would have appreciated closer to around 56.50. Given these developments, most likely I am looking at taking into account, despite on the peso that we're very vulnerable, breaking 59. I think because we're in the fourth quarter, we have remittances coming from OFWs. So hopefully the peso will probably end at around 58.70. And for the stock market, I'm still optimistic of 7.1, but I think a more optimistic number, I think,
realistic,
a more realistic number for the index will most likely be at around 6,500, more or less flat compared to last year's 6,450. Probably the key word is really a reset of valuation. So if we're at 6.5 and the peso's at 58.71, and that could continue to attract potential investors as we try to look at 2025 with probably a growth rate of between 6.3 to 6.5. What will drive it is you have a 1.5 trillion infrastructure program. We are betting on the recovery of the consumer sector, which we saw in the third quarter number. So as you know, Christmas is a good season to see how people are spending. And, you know, when you, like over the weekend and part of your news, you know, a lot of people watched Weekend. So that's spurring a lot of spending for dinner and the movie. So that is a good signal that we're starting to see consumer recovery taking place. And of course, the third is most likely the tailwinds from election spending. From the 2025 midterm election should at least bring the 6.3 to 6.5% growth rate for the Philippines next year.
All right. Thank you, Jonas, for sharing your thoughts on the market with us.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Jonasrellas, Senior Advisor at Reyes Tacandong and Company. In other news, the Ayala family's AC Mobility continues to provide Filipinos with more sustainable way to hit the road, adding a new electric vehicle to their BYD lineup. Our mobility correspondent, G. Baroga, has the details.
AC Mobility is stepping up its game to bring the best new EVs with the BYD Seal 5 DMI, offering a mix of high performance, cutting-edge tech, and user-friendly features for new and eco-conscious car buyers.
This model is a significant leap forward in our shared mission to make electric mobility accessible to every Filipino. This is a partnership that brings together BYD, a global leader in electric vehicle technology, and AC Mobility, a top-of-mind mobility partner providing end-to-end solutions.
BYD tested Seal 5 DMI and proved it can travel over 1,000 kilometers on a single full charge and tank.
Our team, together with Ramrack, the Ramirez brothers, took the Seal 5 from Manila to Tuguegarao to La Union to Clark, from Clark direct to Lipa, then back to Manila in BGC, covering 1,645 kilometers with one full tank and one full charge only.
The Seal 5 DMI comes in two variants, Dynamic and Premium. The launch coincides with BYD's 30th anniversary globally. On November 18th, it hit a historic milestone with the production of its 10 millionth new energy vehicle, the first automaker to reach this achievement.
Today's event is not just representing a new chapter for the BYD, but also a step closer for everybody to achieving a world powered by the clean and renewable energies.
By the end of the year, BYD plans to have 25 operating showrooms across the country, with plans to expand to 40 by 2025. Fans can expect even more product launches next year. For BNC Mobility, G. Baroga.
And before we go, Wicked has now become the highest grossing Broadway musical to be adapted into a film. With an estimated global gross of $164 million, Wicked beats the opening weekend of the Broadway-based film Les Miserables from 2012. This makes it the third highest grossing movie of the year, behind Deadpool 3, Wolverine, and Inside Out 2. Starring Ariana Grande as Glinda and Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba, Wicked is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, revealing how the Wicked Witch of the West came to be. Wicked Part 2 is expected to hit theaters in November of next year. And that's it for Basis Points. I'm Maiki Oreta. We'll be back tomorrow for more news on the financial markets and more. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel, always on top.